Good evening and welcome to Chicago Tonight. I'm Brandis Friedman. Paris Schutz has the evening off. On the show tonight,
he was a model jurist and we will miss him.
Supreme Court Justice Stephen Breyer is expected to retire. We talk about his legacy with former clerks.
We can't afford to have another horrific year.
The race for Chicago mayor gears up as a potential challenger blasts Lightfoot's record on crime.
If the community can come together in unique ways, so should we.
And our Spotlight Politics team on the homicide that brought top law enforcement together in a rare joint news conference.
We have paid, as a city, as taxpayers, an unbelievably heavy toll for his crimes.
A multi-million-dollar settlement for two men wrongfully convicted under a disgraced former police commander. That and more from City Council. An alternative to 911, a new program to have mental health professionals rather than police respond to certain emergency calls. New research showing children in the city's Latino neighborhoods disproportionately impacted by air pollution.
If I can work with animals plus my best friend, sold.
And meet a best friend duo bringing Mexican designs to Chicagoans and their pets. But first, some of today's top stories. Two suspects are charged in the fatal shooting of 8-year-old Melissa Ortega. Ortega was shot Saturday afternoon while walking with her mother in Little Village and taken to Stroger Hospital, where she was pronounced dead. Police say she was the accidental victim of a gang-involved shooting. At a news conference this afternoon, officials announced the arrest of a 27-year-old man and a 16-year-old boy who's set to be charged as an adult. State's Attorney Kim Foxx credited police, her staff, and members of the public.
We could not be here without the commitment of the members of the community who were willing to step up and to speak out on behalf of Melissa and those who have been impacted by her tragic death.
The Chicago Park District rolls out a new effort to prevent and respond to misconduct. The district's interim leader introduced a plan at today's board meeting to create an Office of Prevention and Accountability aimed at tackling issues including sexual misconduct, harassment, and child abuse. The move comes after the Park District's previous superintendent and board president left their posts amid sharp criticism over how they handled sexual harassment and assault accusations from lifeguards. The public has 45 days to comment on the plan to create the new office. We've got much more about this story on our website. And one of Chicago's iconic neighborhood features is now officially a city landmark. At its meeting today, the City Council granted landmark status to the Little Village Arch, which stretches over 26th Street just east of Kedzie. The two-story stucco structure was designed by architect Adrian Lozano to resemble the arches that welcome people to many villages in Mexico. The council voted unanimously in favor of the honor. And we'll have much more about what happened at today's City Council meeting coming up. Up next, a shakeup on the Supreme Court. Stay with us.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by Alexandra and John Nichols, the Jim and Kay Mabey family, the Polk Brothers Foundation, and the support of these donors.
There may soon be a job opening on the country's highest court. Supreme Court Justice Stephen Breyer is expected to announce his retirement after serving more than 2 decades on the court. The vacancy would pave the way for President Joe Biden to make his first Supreme Court pick. And on the campaign trail, he pledged to nominate a black woman to the high court, a historic first. Joining us are former clerks of his, Robert Hochman, head of the Supreme Court and appellate practice at Sidley Austin, Carolyn Shapiro, a professor at Chicago-Kent College of Law and the co-director of the school's Institute on the Supreme Court, and Linda Coberly, head of the appellate and critical motions practice at Winston and Strawn. Thanks to the three of you for joining us. Carolyn, let's start with you, please. President Clinton nominated Justice Breyer he was seated in 1994. Do you see his retirement as the end of an era?
Well, certainly in some regards. The other two people on the court who are on the left with him were, of course, Obama appointees. So in that sense, it's the end of an era. On the other hand, I think Justice Breyer would see it more as passing the baton. I think he believes that he's part of a long tradition of a certain type of jurisprudence and expects that to continue, even although it may not be in the majority.
Linda, talk about how this could be, sort of a personally complicated decision for him.
Well, Justice Breyer is really an institutionalist. He cares deeply about the institution of the court and the role that it plays, and he cares a lot about the independence of the judiciary. So I'm sure it was difficult for him last summer to hear the calls for his retirement from so many people on the left. And it wasn't a surprise to me that he resisted those calls to retire on a schedule that someone else determined. I think he loves what he does. I think he loves this job. I think he plays a really important role, and I think he's got more to say. And so I'm sure for him, it is difficult to see that part of his career draw to a close. I don't think we're going to hear the last of him. First of all, his retirement, as far as I know, is not imminent. There's every reason to think he will sit for the rest of this term. But even after he steps down, I think we're going to have more to hear from him, both as an author, as a teacher, maybe as a federal appellate court judge, as some judges do. Justices do after they retire from the court. They continue to hear cases. So I'm sure that this is bittersweet for him. And I'm sure that this process has been complicated for him as he looks at what's happening on the court and also listens to what's happening in terms of the public conversation.
Right, and hopefully we'll get into some of his decisions over time. Rob, what was it like being a clerk for him?
Oh, well, that is, you're in my personal case, you're a young lawyer just starting out in your career. And Justice Breyer gave me the privilege to walk into the Supreme Court building and be part of really the pinnacle of the institution of the profession that I was entering, and right at the start. And most remarkably for me, he insisted that I not shade my views, do the work, and I don't try to predict what he thinks. He wants to know what I think. He immediately respected our judgment. He wanted it, and he wanted to get the best answer he possibly could in light of his own judgment and ours. And if that doesn't help a young person stand up a little straighter, to be honest with you, I don't know what would. So I'm forever grateful to him on a personal level for that.
Carolyn, one of his well-known recent decisions was in 2016 when he wrote the court's abortion decision striking down a Texas law that had closed nearly half of the clinics in the state. Talk about his work in that decision and what it meant.
Well, that decision was very important because he rejected a pretextual effort by the state of Texas to basically make it close to impossible for abortion clinics to operate, but to do so by claiming that they were trying to protect women's health by imposing what they claimed were necessary health regulations on these clinics. And he absolutely rejected that argument, in part by insisting as a matter of law that regulations actually had to be for the benefit of women. You had to show that they, in fact, were helpful to protecting women's health, but also by insisting on delving deep into the record. He spent an enormous amount of time looking at the facts in that case, and he liked facts. He liked to know what was happening in the world, and he spent much of that opinion detailing with great care what was happening in Texas as a result of these laws and what would happen, and what the lawyers in that case had representing the abortion providers and the women, what they had been able to establish, and that the state of Texas really had nothing on the other side.
Linda, you also have memories around his time with the State of the Union and how he viewed the importance of attending those. Tell us about that.
Well, so when we were clerking, and Rob and I clerked at the same time, it was actually during the impeachment of President Clinton. And during that time in Washington, it was a divisive time in Washington, and there was a lot of acrimony. And I remember hearing him speak during that time about the role of the State of the Union and about the importance of justices attending. You may have seen when the State of the Union is televised, it's always a lot of drama when the members of the Supreme Court walk down and are welcomed into the Senate chamber and sit in the front. And Justice Breyer felt it was really important that the court do that, and did so even when he was literally the only justice to attend the State of the Union. And that was I think, important and a sign of how much he cares about the institutions of government, not just the court, but the legislature and the executive. And the State of the Union is a kind of ceremonial moment when those different institutions come together to form the larger institution. So it was very consistent with his ideology that he would
really
see that as an important moment.
Absolutely. Rob, did his values, contrast then, his values that he has, contrast with, the highly partisan political lens through which a lot of people view the court today?
Yeah, I think that's actually one of the truly distinguishing features of him. It's very easy for us now to fall into a trap of cynicism about the political motivations of the justices and how they drive outcomes in legal cases. And Justice Breyer has been steadfast, extraordinarily steadfast, in refusing to endorse that view. Some people think it might be stubborn. Some people on the other side might call it naive. Whatever you call it, I think you have to acknowledge it's honestly felt. He really believes that. And as Linda has been saying, he believes that because a strong independent judiciary is a jewel of liberty and a jewel of our government. And it's something that if he's not willing to speak up for, if justices sitting on the Supreme Court aren't willing to speak up for in the face of public cynicism, then who will? And I can't credit him enough for that. And I certainly hope that his retirement from the court doesn't lead to either him or others speaking less in that direction. I hope that we get more of that because we need it.
And Carolyn, what do we know about, potential nominees to replace him? And of course, there's some politics to the timing of when that nominee could be confirmed.
Well, we know that there are a number of names that have been thrown around. Two of the leading potential candidates are Justice Leandra Kruger, who's on the California Supreme Court, and Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson, who is actually herself a former Breyer clerk, and who was recently elevated from the district court for the District of Columbia to the DC Circuit, which is some people think of as sort of the second highest court in the land. And they both have really remarkable reputations. The process is going to play out, I think, as quickly as Senator Schumer, Senator Durbin, and the White House can make it happen. I mean, Senator Schumer has already said publicly that he sees no reason that the Democrats can't make this happen as quickly as the Republicans confirmed Justice Barrett. And I think one reason that he wants to do that is because he doesn't want to have anything go wrong. And so the more quickly that this process happens, the less likely it is that there'll be some surprise. I don't anticipate there will be any problem. I mean, the nominees who are being talked about are highly qualified.
And of course, Democrats believe it's important to get it done before the midterm elections in case something should happen to that very slim Democratic majority in the Senate. Carolyn Shapiro, Robert Hochman, and Linda Coberly, thanks to the three of you for joining us.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Two men who spent decades behind bars for crimes they did not commit will be getting $14 million from the city. Alderpeople signed off on the settlement today during City Council's first meeting of the year. WTTW News reporter Heather Sharon joins us now with more. And Heather, tell us about these two men, Kevin Bailey and Corey Batchelor, and their wrongful conviction.
Well, this goes back to 1989 when they were 19 and they were arrested, charged, and convicted in the murder of Lula Mae Woods, the wife of a retired Chicago police officer. They contended for years that they were innocent and that their confessions to the crime had been coerced by detectives who had been trained by Commander John Burge, who we now know tortured and abused more than 100 Black men in Chicago and framed them for crimes that they did not commit. Bailey spent 28 years in prison and Batchelor spent 15 years in prison before being exonerated in 2008. Each of them will get $7 million.
Today, Heather, you asked the mayor if today's settlement closes the door on the Burge claims that Chicago taxpayers have been paying out. Let's take a listen.
We have paid, as a city, as taxpayers, an unbelievably heavy toll for his crimes. These payments are obviously of great concern to me not just for him, but we have others where there's serious allegations of misconduct, and we have to make sure that when the claims are valid, that we do what we can to address the harm that's been done.
So not entirely clear there, Heather, but what is the toll that Mayor Lightfoot was talking about, and why is the city still dealing with these cases nearly 30 years after Burge was fired?
That's right. So in all, the city has paid at least $130 million to men who said that they were abused and then convicted of crimes that they did not commit. But I think the damage that John Burge and those that he trained goes far deeper, because it has certainly played a role in the deep distrust in the Black community in Chicago with the Chicago Police Department. And we heard again today in a separate crime that that lack of trust has real issues and causes real problems for Chicago.
So moving on, we also heard earlier in the show about the approved landmark status for the Little Village Arch early in the show. Any other major actions from today's meeting?
Well, really a minor change. Now Chicago restaurants can no longer offer kids' meal with sugary drinks like pop. Instead, they will have to market the meals with milk or water or juice. This implements a state law that took effect January 1st in Chicago in an attempt to reduce childhood obesity and to help little ones perhaps make healthier choices, even though their parents can ask for pop if that's what they want.
Probably good for parents to note, just in case. Also, the next meeting date, and what should we be looking out for?
Well, that's February 23rd, and we could see a final vote on the mayor's proposal that would allow the city to sue gang leaders in an attempt to recover what she calls their ill-gotten gains from crimes. That money, if approved, would go to help victims and fund victim services. It is very controversial, with critics saying that it will not do anything to address crime in Chicago.
Okay, and of course, we'll talk about that more later on. Heather, looking forward to seeing you in Spotlight Politics. Heather Sharon, thanks so much.
Thanks, Brandis.
And you can read Heather's full story on our website. It's all at WTTW.com/news. We are more than a year out from Chicago's mayoral election, but the race is already heating up, with one potential candidate slamming the city's approach to violence. Amanda Vinicky joins us now with more. Amanda, who are we talking about?
Ernest, that potential challenger is Arne Duncan, who'd previously served as CEO of Chicago Public Schools, and then also for President Barack Obama served as the U.S. Department of Education head. He is now currently head of an organization called CRED, that is an anti-violence group, a nonprofit that's aimed at ending gun violence. But his next move, yes, could be running for governor.
I haven't changed. I'm absolutely thinking about it. I've made these reports every single year. This is not a new conversation. This is something I've been doing repeatedly at the City Club and other places. And I think all of us as citizens are just extraordinarily concerned about where we are as a city right now and want to get to a better place.
To be clear, running for mayor, not governor there, state politics reporter slip up. Anyway, Duncan has said that leaders in the business community have been pushing him to run again for that the office of mayor. He did answer questions from members of the media in a digital press conference that followed a presentation to the Chicagoland Chamber of Commerce, which issued a statement saying, "We are in need of an immediate action to prevent homicides, shootings, robberies, muggings, and carjackings from occurring tomorrow, this weekend, and next week, in addition to a plan addressing the root causes of crime and violence. Simply put, 2022 cannot be like 2021 in the city of Chicago." Now, Duncan likewise called Chicago's crime horrific, and he started out with his presentation saying that the city's approach is not working, and he says that it is clear why.
Here's where we are today. Chicago has more police, more murders, and a lower clearance rate than both New York and LA. And this has been true, sadly, for years. We are the outlier. We are the terrible anomaly. It does not have to be this way.
Duncan says that issues include a police department in crisis with low morale that is connected to unfilled vacancies, turnover, and too many retirements. Also, a lack of trust between the community and police, and also a department that's torn in too many directions, he says, having to deal with issues like homelessness and fulfilling community interaction quotas, issues he says potentially civilians could be dealing with. Even, he says, too much focus by the CPD on gun seizures, which he says does not correlate with a decrease in crime. He says that the understaffed police department needs to focus on bulking up patrols in neighborhoods and get hyper-focused on making arrests in homicide cases.
The biggest crisis facing our city is violence. It's shootings and homicides. And that's what we want officers focused on. And I think what folks don't understand enough is that the biggest driver of violence in our city is violence. It's retaliations for previous violence because things don't get solved.
Duncan says that it's not rocket science, but he says it will take courage to approach violence in a new way. Now, when asked about his confidence in Mayor Lori Lightfoot and also in Police Superintendent David Brown, Duncan said that he's not blaming anyone, and this is not about any one individual. It is about the entire system. He nonetheless did take aim at a signature Lightfoot plan that Heather had just mentioned to go after gang leaders' assets. Duncan says that this strategy does not work. But Brown says going after so-called blood money will dismantle gangs.
Al Capone wasn't arrested for the violence he meted out here. He was arrested because we took his stuff. He didn't file his taxes. And the violence he took with him to the federal pen to his death.
Now, when asked about Duncan, the mayor initially said it is not time to focus on politics, but she went on to say this.
In the midst of this violence, that the best thing to do is defund our police department, not provide them with the support and resources they need to be able to frankly address exactly the kinds of violence that we're talking about, isn't a serious person.
Now, Duncan, a couple years back, had proposed reducing spending on the CPD to free up money for violence prevention. Today, he said that how officers are deployed is more important than the number that make up the CPD force. Now, I did ask political scientist and former Chicago Alderman Dick Simpson to weigh in on all of this chatter about a contentious mayoral race this far in advance.
Everyone thinks, well, it'd be easy. I'll run against Lightfoot. She's unpopular in certain points in time. But it isn't an easy job. It's a difficult job to run for mayor, and it takes a very careful and major effort, and it has to start now.
Simpson says that crime will be a major focus of that mayoral race, as it is, by the way, with the governor's one. With that, Brenda, back to you.
Amanda, thank you. And of course, we'll see you in a little bit for Spotlight Politics as well. Up next, turning a pandemic side hustle into a business. Stay with us.
I come from a people that not only found a way to survive through the most horrific circumstances, but they thrived.
I could not save one of the boys of color in my own life. If my family could be exposed to this horror, then really it could happen to anyone. We are truly all in this together.
And there's much more ahead on the program, including Congresswoman Marie Newman in hot water over a potential ethics violation. But first, a Chicagoan took the extra time the pandemic provided as an opportunity to start her own side hustle. Now she's the owner of a shop in Pilsen that connects its customers and their pets with handmade designs from Mexico. Colorful collars, tiny sweaters, and patterned vests. Pilsen's Pocha Pets Boutique offers unique handmade designs for Chicagoans' furry friends.
All of our items are outfits for cats, dogs, even bunnies, even ferrets. We have really, really tiny outfits, so that will definitely fit your pets.
All of the items are made in Guadalajara, Mexico, by owner Cynthia Soto's best friend, Jessamine Gonzalez Carrasco.
Yo hacía ropa así como para personas y todo. Yo tengo una perrita, una chihuahua. Todos los retazos que me sobraban, pues le empecé a hacer ropa.
Gonzalez Carrasco has her own shop in Mexico, Benito Mota.
Martita, can you sit?
Soto used to work in childcare. Then the pandemic hit.
I was kind of looking as like for a side hustle, something to do, just not sit at home and wait to see what was happening.
Soto was already buying Gonzalez Carrasco's products for her own dogs. She decided to try selling them to others in Chicago.
Te voy a dar tantos productos. O sea, te los doy, no te preocupes. Y y ya en el momento que vayas vendiendo, pues me vas pagando o algo así.
Soto says the business quickly grew from there.
I think quarantine also brought everyone closer together to their pets and or pushed them out the door to adopt pets.
Gunther obviously loves being here, and yeah, everyone that I've ever interacted with here is great.
In March 2021, Soto opened a storefront in Pilsen.
How are you?
The boutique's name comes from a derogatory term. Soto says she was called growing up as a first-generation Mexican-American.
Bocha or bocho is basically a derogative word used by Mexicans to describe other Mexicans that aren't Mexican enough.
Today, Soto embraces the word and says she's working to present it in a positive light at her boutique.
I'm not just Mexican, I'm not just American, I am a mix of both, and I am very proud of that culture because it makes me who I am.
Recently, business has slowed. Soto says they've been experimenting with unique products for pets.
So we're trying our best to keep that alive. We are baking a lot more items. So like the roscas, we did cookie decorating for Christmas also.
But Soto and Gonzalez Carrasco hope to expand business in the future.
Que ya tenga eso de que abarque un poquito más de Estados Unidos y pues yo los principales de México.
I want to grow into maybe California, Florida, just, expand our stores so that other people can see us and see themselves within the name and see themselves like seen.
And the Pilsen boutique is now offering special Valentine's Day themed treats, including pop cakes and charcuterie boards. See what we did there? For more information on the shop and the holiday treats, visit WTTW.com/news. Still to come on Chicago Tonight, an alternative to 911. A new state-funded program will send mental health professionals rather than police to some emergency calls. A new interactive map allows you to see if sources of pollution are close to your home and your kids' school.
Ladies and gentlemen, we've lost too many children to violence in Chicago. Too many.
And our Spotlight Politics team on whether Chicagoans can see more cooperation from the mayor, state's attorney, and police superintendent moving forward. But first, some more of today's top stories. Chicago Public Schools CEO says he wants district leadership to be as diverse as the student population. The comments come on the heels of two top district officials announcing their departure. Chief Health Officer Kenneth Fox and Interim Chief Education Officer Maurice Swinney. Speaking at today's CPS board meeting, CEO Pedro Martinez says he's working to bring more Black and Latino leaders into the district fold. And we have more of this story on our website. Another Chicago-based COVID testing company faces a government probe. Block Club Chicago reports O'Hare Clinical Lab is facing investigations from the state public health department. It's also been the subject of complaints to the Illinois Attorney General's office, with patients reportedly getting results weeks late or not at all. The company has gotten more than $186 million in federal reimbursement for COVID testing. Chicago marks its coldest day of the year with sub-zero temperatures and even lower wind chills. According to the National Weather Service, this morning saw temps of -5 at Midway with a wind chill of 17 below, and it was 6 below at O'Hare with a wind chill of -18. But we're expected to get a reprieve tomorrow with a high of 30 in the forecast. Mental health professionals, rather than just police, are now responding to some emergency calls with the launch of a new state-funded program. The aim is to try to prevent a mental health crisis from turning into a potentially deadly encounter with police, prioritizing treatment over a criminal justice response when possible. The nonprofit provider Trilogy Behavioral Healthcare, based in Rogers Park, launched its mental health emergency responder program earlier this month. And joining us now to share how it's going so far are Samantha Handley, president and CEO of Trilogy Behavioral Healthcare, based in Rogers Park, and Christopher Mayer, clinical director of crisis services at Trilogy. Thanks to you both for joining us. Samantha Mayer, let's start with you, please. Tell us how this program works exactly.
Well, Trilogy's First Response Alternative Crisis Team, or FACT team, provides support to individuals in crisis when and where support is needed. FACT provides immediate mobile response to people experiencing a mental health crisis by sending out mental health professionals to help keep people safe and get them linked to the services that they need.
And Christopher, how do you coordinate the response from Trilogy? How do you coordinate that with police officers?
Yeah, absolutely. So as part of the state program as implemented, the Normal response is for mental health first responders to go out solo to calls where there isn't any indication of significant physical safety risk. So when we receive a call to our crisis line, a staff answers that call and coordinates a response of one of the response teams. And so if there is an indication that police accompaniment would be necessary, then we also coordinate with police partners to respond in person with them.
And you said when you get a call to your crisis line, where does that call come from? Does that call come from 911 dispatch?
Not as of yet. So currently, we operate our own crisis line, and calls come from either individuals themselves in the community or different partners, healthcare organizations, nonprofits, ward offices, sort of all different types of stakeholders. Eventually, calls will get dispatched from a new mental health hotline that people can access by dialing 988. And that number is rolling out nationally, but in Illinois, that will be connected to a network of providers just like us all throughout the state.
Okay, and Samantha Handley, Chicago's Department of Public Health, it also launched a similar program last fall. Will responses between your program, the one with the state, and the cities, will those be coordinated at some point?
I'm not sure about that. I know that right now we are primarily dealing with the north side. So we are primarily covering Rogers Park, Edgewater, Westridge, Uptown, and then the suburbs of Skokie and Evanston. But we are always in meetings with other providers. We are all learning how to do this together, sharing resources, and building a system that will work best for everyone that lives in the Chicago and Illinois community.
And Samantha, this rolled out, we know, earlier this month. How is it working so far?
Well, I think it's working really well. Chris is actually the best person to ask because he's the one that's actually been seeing some people that have been calling the number.
Yeah, Christopher?
It's been going great. We have been getting calls. People have been made aware of the line. So we're happy that our community engagement efforts have been reaching people to increase access to this service. So things have been running smoothly, and the meetings that have happened so far have been going well.
And Samantha, what would be needed? Because as you said, you're working in the north side right now and several suburbs immediately next door to Chicago. What would eventually be needed to scale this up into other communities?
Well, really what we need right now is just more people. I mean, we've hired about 9 or 10 clinicians right now. We're hiring counselors and social workers and peer support people. These are individuals with lived mental health experience that can provide support to people as well. And so that's what we've been focusing on. And as we continue to ramp up our program, we'll be able to offer it eventually 24/7, 365 days a year. And I think, you really just need the manpower to be able to do this service by qualified mental health professionals.
And of course, Samantha, we've heard a lot of talk about the increased need for mental health care over the course of this pandemic. Have you experienced an increase in demand for the services you provide?
Absolutely. Across the board in all of our services, whether it's our community-based outreach services, our child and adolescent therapy services, our adult therapy services, just across the board, the demand is so high. People understand the level of social isolation that people went through during COVID really increased people's mental health symptoms, in addition to, losing jobs, food insecurity, income insecurity, all of those things combined with the social isolation has really created a perfect storm for people to experience mental health symptoms.
And of course, in some cases, losing a loved one to the illness itself. Christopher, in 2019, the police department alone responded to more than 41,000 calls involving a mental health issue. The fire department responded to another 27,000 calls. Given the scale of this need, is a program like this just the beginning?
Absolutely, it's just the beginning. We're really going to see the system expand and all levels of the system become really more robust, both the actual public responses as well as nonprofits throughout the state. So in just the first year of this program, there was $70 million that was invested in community mental health centers throughout the state to scale and increase access to these services.
Okay, and briefly before we let you go, Christopher, give us a sense of what happens on the ground if, when there is a call where both a mental health provider and police officers need to respond.
Yeah, absolutely. So we often coordinate responses with police when we're concerned that there is a significant physical safety risk. So one example would be earlier this week, we received a call, with information that there might be weapons in the home in addition to someone experiencing active psychosis. And so in that type of situation, we're not going to respond solo. We coordinated with the crisis intervention officers of the 24th District, which is the Rogers Park Police District, to respond with us to try to provide support to that individual. Okay. So that's typically what it looks like when we're coordinating.
All right. Important work for you both. Samantha Handley and Christopher Mayer, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Chicago Public School students in predominantly Latino communities are being disproportionately impacted by pollution emitted from industrial sites across the city. That's the research from researchers at the University of Illinois, Chicago, who created a new interactive map highlighting those sources of pollution near schools and homes, along with a 3-part study. Joining us to discuss findings from the map and the impact of pollution on communities of color are Jose Acosta Cordova, environmental planning and research organizer for the Little Village Environmental Justice Organization, and Michael Kalis, associate professor of environmental and occupational sciences at the University of Illinois at Chicago. Thanks to the two of you, for joining us. Michael Kalis, let's start with you, please. Tell us a little bit about what your team found and why you researched the areas you did. Michael, I think your Zoom is on mute.
We were invited by a community group to start this work almost 2 years ago, and as soon as we started, we found out that there's a very high density of polluting sources in the southwest side of the city. Just to bring up an example, out of the 8 rail yards that Chicago has within the city limits, 6 of them are in the southwest side, okay? So that immediately strikes as something really significant. Significant in terms of a polluting source, because rail yards are a major polluting source, as everybody knows. Noise as well, traffic, all those nice things associated with rail hubs. So that's how we started, and what we found as well is amazingly, in that part of the town, polluting sources are very close to schools. And that's how we decided to measure the burden on the community, not in terms of an abstract, let's say, population center, but in terms of how far away the polluting sources are from the schools. And in the first 2 dashboards that we presented, that's what we've done. And we presented basically the burden on the community via the schools as an indicator.
And Jose, what's your reaction to UIC's findings here?
I mean, it's not surprising for us. This is something that we've known for many decades now, right? El Veco was actually formed around a fight for cleaning up our schools in Little Village. And we have several schools that are either located within the industrial corridor or that are surrounded by toxic industries. So for us, it's not surprising to see the results. I think what's more surprising is the lack of consideration by city and health officials, in particular CDPH and our local elected officials who've allowed our schools to be polluted and our young people to be exposed to pollution from a very young age.
Michael Kalis, back to you. What kind of pollution are we talking about here?
Well, the major polluting sources, if we consider the rail yards, are particulate matter, which is, fine particles that, are transmitted in the air. The other sources, which, and I think there's a misunderstanding here, the other sources are basically emissions from industry that's categorized as a toxic release inventory reporting industry. It's a federal program. All the major polluters in the nation have to report their emissions there. So what we found is that these polluters, because of the industrial corridors that were mentioned before are very close to schools. Some of them are just half a mile away. Now, permit-wise and threshold-wise, they're okay. The problem is not the individual, facilities. The problem is the, big number of facilities surrounding those schools. And that's what we are trying to bring to the attention of your audience and other people. And
so you're saying it's a concentration then of multiple, sort of a concentration of multiple polluters within such proximity to these schools.
Correct.
Jose, what are some of the conditions that led us here? How did we get so many polluters around schools? How did schools get to be around those industries and those industrial sites?
Yeah, I mean, it's important to look back in history, right? And many of these industrial areas in the south and southwest sides of the city have been industrial for a very long time. Some of them more than 100 years, right? So it was actually because of these industrial areas were located where they were, that residential areas, the neighborhoods actually grew around them, right? And over time, particularly over the last 60 years or so, as these communities they transitioned from being majority white ethnic to majority Latino or majority Black, that the concentration of the facilities became worse. And this is when you start to see environmental racism come into play, right? As the communities became more Black and brown, you also saw further concentration of toxic facilities in these areas, particularly when you look at transportation, distribution, logistics, like Dr. Kailas mentioned, that these areas have a lot of TDL facilities, a lot of warehouses, and the rail yards, right? These intermodal ports that attract a lot of truck traffic. So this is a historical phenomenon,
and Jose,
it's getting worse.
I just want to jump in because we're almost out of time. But what would you like to see done about this problem?
We would like to see a response by our city leaders, right? We would like to see more regulations, more protections for our young people in the community. Many of these industries don't actually report what their emissions are like, what their pollution is actually like. So it's often hard to tell, right? And it's really great that researchers are doing this type of or producing this type of work, but it's also an indication of the lack of information and data that's out there, and that's stuff that our city should be collecting and should be able to be producing in order to protect not only our young people but everybody in these communities.
And of course, the map also, it's interactive, so residents can use the map, input their address, and find out information for themselves. That's where we'll have to leave it. Jose Acosta Cordova and Michael Kailas, thank you both for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Up next, our Spotlight Politics team with their take on this week's headlines. But first, a look at the weather. Charges in the killing of an 8-year-old bring a rare news conference and the politics of naming a new Supreme Court justice in tonight's Spotlight Politics. Here with all that and more are Amanda Vinicky and Heather Sharon. So today we know Mayor Lightfoot appeared with Police Superintendent David Brown and Cook County State's Attorney Kim Foxx to announce charges in the fatal shooting of an 8-year-old in Little Village. Here's what they said when asked about this rare joint news conference today.
The tragedies that we have seen during the course of this year and last and historically requires us to come together.
It is a unique opportunity for us to have a public showing of what happens behind the scenes.
I think you'll see more opportunities for us to demonstrate a unity of purpose.
Heather, does this indicate, a deep freeze thawing between the CPD, the mayor's office, and the state's attorney?
Well, I don't know about that, but it was certainly in everybody's best interest to play nice in front of the cameras today, to show a unified front in the wake of this horrific death of 8-year-old Melissa Ortega. But I think that the animosity between Kim Foxx and Mayor Lightfoot has been overstated. Let's not forget that Lightfoot endorsed Foxx for re-election, and certainly she has had her criticism of Kim Foxx. But the fact of the matter is that they're both Democrats. They both are on the same team, and their both successes depend on each other. And I think sometimes it's an easy way to sort of shorthand tension between these two offices that have very different goals and very different needs and very different powers. When it comes to crime in Chicago and Cook County, it's a very complicated issue.
Amanda, does the mayor stand to benefit from better relations with Kim Foxx, especially regarding tackling Chicago's violence problem?
Well, yes, if it comes to actually tackling the problem, if there is resolution, if crime goes down, if this leads to something, then yes, that would, of course, take aside politics for a heartbeat. That would be the best for all of Chicago. Of course, that is the goal that everybody wants. Politically, yeah, it would look good to get along. I think there are some people, it is easy, of course, politically to have somebody to point a finger at. I think Heather's right. Sometimes there's overblown tensions. Some of it, however, is very much, I think, real. You want something done, and it isn't happening when it comes to crime. And so, yes, I think the long and short of it is if they can come forward and show that they're working together, that would make her look better. As we just talked about, she's gearing up for re-election.
Now, Heather, we know today you covered city council meeting where Alderman Anthony Beal tried to get a lawyer to help city council members. Explain why this was a contentious issue.
Well, it's very complicated, but essentially Anthony Bill and 29 other alder people want their own lawyer so that when Mayor Lightfoot or, the city's corporation council rules against something that a majority of the council wants, they can sort of push back. Because right now, if the mayor rules something on the council floor out of order and the corporation counsel's office agrees with her, sometimes the city council is out of luck, and they are very, very frustrated about that. And I think today was a great example of the use of that sort of parliamentary procedure to prevent something from happening that the mayor doesn't want to happen. Now, she says she's in favor of the city council having their own lawyer. She just wants them to do it in a rational, thought out, comprehensive sort of way, because the motion on the floor today didn't say how much this would cost. So some aldermen were reluctant to vote for it because they didn't want to put the city on the hook for potentially, more than $100,000 for a full-time staff person. So this is a debate that's going to come up, but for people who love Robert's Rules of Order, today was a bad day.
Robert's Rules of Order. Speaking of contentious issues, the battle over a new ward map continues between the Latino and the Black caucuses. Heather, what is the latest?
Well, it appears that delegates from the Black Caucus and the Latino Caucus will meet behind closed doors on Friday, and maybe they will make more progress than they made in all 4 of the public hearings, because the grand total of progress in those meetings was zippo. The clock is ticking. Eventually, if 41 aldermen don't agree on a map, this will go to voters in June with the June primary to decide what Chicago's ward map should look like, and that will really determine the balance of power for the next 10 years.
Amanda, what's the likelihood that this ends up with the voters?
Well, I would love, of course, what reporter wouldn't love to be at that closed door meeting? And that is often where we see these things battled out. It is a matter of math. I'm not quite sure, given the promises that the Latino and the Black Caucus have each made, how you can find a resolution, but certainly it is in their interest to do so. They still do have some time. I believe that the deadline to do this is sometime in May. So we are right now are freezing our fannies off, right? Maybe by the time the flowers are blooming again, they'll have worked it out.
Okay, so Arnie Duncan, looking like a candidate for mayor today, criticizing the Chicago Police Department and Lori Lightfoot's handling of the violence problem. Amanda, you covered this today. If he runs, how much trouble could this be for Lightfoot in her reelection?
Well, of course, it all depends as well on who else may enter. The Chicago Teachers Union Vice President, Stacey Davis Gates, has not said no, and her name is often mentioned. Arnie Duncan, the fact that he has come out and said, yeah, I'm thinking about it, that's a pretty big sign that he's going to declare. Of course, anything can happen, but that's big. And it could be an issue for her, given that she previously, just the entire dynamic has changed from when she first won office. She was unknown then, really cobbled together a majority that came from a lot of corners. you knock those off, and she doesn't have the support as well from progressives, really. Right now, they've gotten very upset with her, and of course the CTU front, so it could spell trouble for her. But then again, Arne Duncan doesn't have an organization. He doesn't necessarily have foot soldiers. He may get money through the backing of the business community, but that's something that you need as well. People to knock on doors for you, get petitions signed and whatnot.
Heather, we mentioned this earlier in the show. He also slammed her gang assets seizure plan. Is that going anywhere in City Council?
Well, that is a good question, and I am waiting to see whether the City Council's Public Safety Committee schedules a vote sometime in the next 3 weeks or so. The City Council meets again at the end of February, and they could take a vote on the measure at that time. He really echoed criticism from people like Cook County Public Defender Sharon Mitchell, who said this ordinance isn't going to do anything except target people who have family members who are in gangs and maybe share a car with them or share a home, and that they will find themselves in the crosshairs of this. But we heard Superintendent David Brown at that news conference this afternoon saying that this was a tool that the police department needed to dismantle the gangs involved in killing Melissa Ortega. And that is going to be a very powerful argument for aldermen who are staring down re-election in about a year and who want to at least be able to tell people, okay, maybe crime is still really bad, but we did everything we could think of to address it. And that is why there is going to be a big push to get this through, because nobody wants to be seen as not doing everything possible to prevent another child being killed by a gang in Chicago.
Such a tragic story, the Melissa Ortega that we're hearing and reporting this week. So in national news, a little bit of national politics, U.S. House of Representative Ethics Panel continues to review allegations against Congresswoman Marie Newman, that allegations that she offered a political rival a job to stay out of the election back in 2020. Heather, did Newman break the law? What's going on here?
Well, she says she didn't. The House Ethics Panel says, well, maybe there's evidence that you did. And of course, this all involves, her before the 2020 election, working with a, potential future rival and sort of coming to an agreement where perhaps she would give him a job and then move forward. And you can't do that. You can't offer things like that. It's against the law. But what's interesting, of course, is that Marie Newman is caught in an intra-Democratic party squabble. She faces Sean Casten in a redrawn district. So she was already sort of facing an uphill battle, as any Democrat redistricted into the same district is. So this is another sort of piece that she's going to have to sort of figure out. And there are lots of questions and it will give Sean Casten an opening to say, look, you don't have to deal with that. I'm a reliable pro-Biden progressive voice in Congress. Let's just move along here.
All right. So some of Illinois' wealthiest residents, they are ponying up the cash for Richard Irvin's gubernatorial run, including a television ad campaign that launched this week. Amanda, is this campaign ad stretching the truth?
So the issue in the campaign ad is that Richard Irvin says that he called in the National Guard, that Chicago didn't do anything when there was unrest, when there was looting. We covered it in Aurora as well as the city of Chicago, when in fact the only person who can actually activate the National Guard is the governor of Illinois. Granted, that may well have come at the request of a mayor, for example, somebody like Richard Irvin. So it is certainly stretching the truth there. That is what these campaign ads do. The difficulty right now is that reporters haven't had the opportunity to ask him directly. He's up on air, commercials, had a very lengthy bio introduction that came out digitally, but has not at this point in time held any sort of press conference or one-on-one interviews with journalists that will be covering this race who really want to ask questions such as that.
And Heather, you've done some reporting on this as well. Not the first time you've seen ads stretch the truth?
Sure. Richard Irvin is clearly addressing people who are worried about crime, and this plays into his sort of tough on crime approach. The problem is that I think it's really important that we know exactly what powers a mayor and a governor has, especially something so fraught with Chicago and the National Guard. The other thing I want to mention is that his rhetoric really echoes Ken Griffin, Illinois' richest person, the the owner of Citadel Hedge Fund. And he was also very critical of the way Governor J.B. Pritzker has responded to the surge in crime. So that's part of this as well. And we're all waiting to see what Ken Griffin does. And I know we'd sure like to ask Richard Irvin whether he would accept Ken Griffin's money. So, you know, there are a lot of questions that we are all eager to answer.
A whole bunch of questions. Political reporters across the state dying to ask him. Heather Sharon, Amanda Vinicky, thanks as always. And we're back to wrap things up right after this.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by Alexandra and John Nichols, the Jim and Kay Mabey family, the Polk Brothers Foundation, and the support of these donors.
And that is our show for this Wednesday night. Don't forget to stay connected with us by signing up for our daily briefing. And you can get Chicago Tonight streamed on Facebook, YouTube, and our website, WTTW.com/news. You can also get the show via podcast and the PBS video app. And please join us tomorrow night live at 7. A cafe turned market is bringing food to Kenwood residents. That's the next stop on our In Your Neighborhood series. And the upcoming Winter Olympics will feature 3 ski jumpers from Illinois. We visit the historic ski club that taught them how to fly. Now, for all of us here at Chicago Tonight, I'm Brandis Friedman. Thanks for watching. Stay healthy and warm, and have a good night.
Closed captioning is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, a Chicago personal injury and wrongful death firm that supports free educational initiatives in the legal profession.